It's a new year, and we'll be here to cover every crisis around the planet. 2019 is going to be lit, and I'm not even sure what that means, but whatever it is, it's got to be good. We'll find out here on The Hot Zone.
This is The Hot Zone. Engaging with the news in a whole new way, international war correspondent Chuck Holton brings insight into areas of crisis and lets you help those affected.
Thanks for being with us, everybody. Happy New Year. Hope your celebrations last night were safe and memorable. Mine were. We drove up to the rim of the valley overlooking our little town and watched thousands of fireworks. It didn't come out too well on my iPhone, but trust me, it was spectacular. Pretty memorable time for us. Well, I've got big plans for the coming year, and today I want to make a list of the 10 hot zones I'd like to cover most in 2019. One of the frustrations of being a journalist is that you're always beholden to whoever's paying the freight. I mean, for example, if I'm working for Fox, they might not be interested in the plight of the Hill Tribe's Christians in Burma or something like that. Or even if they are, they might not have the budget for it. So this has always been a problem, and normally just kind of comes with the territory. But I've got a mind to change that this year. I have some ideas, and I'm going to run them by you. Now, since I have relationships with various different agencies as a freelance war correspondent, I'm going to try to do something new. My idea is to go wherever I want and then sell the packages that I make and the media that I produce to as many agencies as possible. Now, this makes it cheaper for everybody because none of them have to pay for all the travel, and it still makes it profitable for me. Now, while I'm there, wherever there is, I can take photos and shoot packages, do live interviews, and even write articles for various outlets, and hopefully all of them put together will pay for the travel and still allow me to put some food on the table. It also lets you have more of a hand in where I go. So let me know where you'd like to see me head. Now, you can help also, if you want, by going over to patreon.com/hotzone and subscribing. You'll get signed copies of my books and bonus content and even more for just $36 for the entire year. And we can kind of crowdfund not only the news, but you'll also get to see your contributions helping people directly, whether it's hurricane survivors or Syrian refugees. Let's partner together to make the news and make it good, shall we? Now, people like Zaina are the ones who are going to benefit most from this. I want to introduce you to her. I met her when I was in Iraq the last time covering the fight against ISIS. This is 15-year-old Zainab, and she's obviously in great pain here. She had her arm traumatically amputated in an airstrike about 2 weeks ago. They've been moving toward the front lines with the Peshmerga here. Her mother was killed, her uncle was killed, her father was wounded, and her brother was wounded as well. And this is some of the horrors that are really on full display here that are only going to get worse as the fight for Mosul continues. Okay. Here's a list of the places that I'm hoping to cover this year. Number one is Syria. I'm going to go to Turkey on the way there and maybe do some coverage in Turkey, but Syria is the largest scale humanitarian crisis of our time. It's now in its 8th year with over 12 million people displaced, as many as 500,000 dead, and the effects are literally being felt all around the globe, but especially in neighboring countries like Turkey and Jordan, and especially, of course, in Europe. Now, I've got tickets to go to Erbil at the end of January, like I said, and I'll be spending a couple of weeks in Syria with my good friend Dave Eubank from the Free Burma Rangers, also the Free Kurdish Rangers. So would you pray for us if you get a chance, and also for the people who are suffering from 8 long years of war? Now, in reality, the mass exodus from Syria started a much wider and deeper crisis as tens of millions of people from poor countries across Africa and the Middle East realized that it would be possible to follow those Syrian refugees into Europe and take advantage of those countries' generous social welfare programs to include free housing and food and medical care and education. And all of that is kind of like winning the lottery for people who are used to living in Africa. And without a doubt, the worldwide epidemic of mass migration from the third world to the first is not only an indicator of crisis zones pushing people to seek a better life, it's also creating new crisis zones in Europe as millions of destitute, desperate people push into those Western countries uninvited. And sometimes they bring their problems with them. And what I mean is this: if you're If you've lived in a failed state for most of your life, you really don't have any concept of the rule of law, or even the golden rule for that matter. So when you arrive in a civilized country, you're going to have a really difficult time assimilating to the morals and values that made that country the kind of place people want to get into. I mean, we're seeing this all across Europe as masses of military-age males who successfully make it to the continent are contributing to a wave of crime and sexual assaults and violence, which is then causing the electorate in those countries like Italy and Austria and the UK, to kind of lurch to the right and elect populist and nationalist leaders who will promise to crack down on that flood of migrants. I mean, it's pretty clear that Brexit wouldn't have happened. It wouldn't even be a thing if it weren't for the civil war in Syria and all those migrants coming north. So that's a great example of chaos theory at work, I think. And there's no shortage of chaos. So for me, I guess you just say that's job security. The second country I'd like to cover is what's known as Londonistan, or the UK. There are lots of stories to tell there, from acid attacks at epidemic levels to the point where the government's even cracking down on the purchase of bathroom cleaners, to knife attacks at historic highs, I mean daily in London especially. And the hordes of desperate migrants also who are braving death to cross the English Channel and get in to the UK before they're scheduled to leave the EU at 11 p.m. on Friday, the 29th of March, 2019.
The Home Secretary, Sajid Javid, has declared a major incident after a surge in the number of migrants trying to cross the English Channel in small boats. 75 people have reached the UK in the past 3 days, but only one of the 5 patrol boats operated by the UK Border Force is currently operating in the Channel.
Now, I could easily spend 10 days or so covering all this and then jump over to Calais and then down to Normandy to report on the preparations for the upcoming 75th anniversary of D-Day in June. Now, number 3 is Ukraine. I hope to go to the Crimea in March and report on the fighting, which has been going on there since 2014, when the Russians kind of said, mine, to that region. Fighting is still happening there as we speak in the Donbass region of eastern Ukraine, and it's pretty clear the Russians are intent on extending their influence further into that area and all the way to the Black Sea if they can. Now, I'm not sure I can get in at the moment, but I have some contacts who are planning a trip there, and I might be able to tag along, so we'll see. Number 4 is Afghanistan. We still have thousands of U.S. troops there, and later this year, one of those troops will be my oldest son, Mason. Now, I haven't been to that country since like 2013 or so it'll be interesting to go back and see how much it's changed. From what I'm hearing, not much, except that the U.S. troop presence is a lot smaller now, so a lot of those bases are like ghost towns, and it's slated to get reduced even further. President Trump is getting a lot of feedback from his generals over that decision and to pull the troops out of Syria and Afghanistan. But some of my sources say that the real reason for doing so is because Trump plans to privatize bigger chunks of what we're doing in those places. That means hiring more military contractors to do the jobs that U.S. troops were there doing. And there are some pretty valid arguments for the efficiency and effectiveness of using private military contractors. And so it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. Number 5 is South Africa. The media has really failed miserably in its reporting on this particular crisis. Racial violence is nearing genocidal proportions there, but not against blacks. No, it's white farmers who are being murdered and driven off their land at an absolutely horrifying rate. And reportedly, the government of South Africa is actually sanctioning this violence. Now, I've spoken with multiple groups of South Africans, white South Africans, who say at the rate things are going, all the whites will either be killed or driven out of that country within just a few years. And I want to go and see for myself just how bad it really is. And I hope to get there maybe in May or so. Number 6 is Venezuela. It's kind of the Syria of the Western Hemisphere at this point. It's already led to wave after wave of refugees escaping the crushing poverty, the hyperinflation, the despair, the lack of toilet paper, and all of that in that socialist paradise. Riots and violence are about the only thing that are not in short supply in Venezuela, and I want to do some more reporting on it. But now Venezuela is one of the only few countries that my wife says I can't actually visit. But I'm planning to go to Colombia, where there are already over 1 million Venezuelan refugees, and then report from the border areas there about that deepening crisis. If that corrupt and evil government doesn't collapse soon, or I guess even if it does, I believe this could be one of the biggest stories of the year. Number 7 of the countries I'd like to visit is Nigeria. Like the UK, there are multiple amazing stories to tell in this region. You got Boko Haram, the ISIS-inspired terror group, which is still killing and raping and kidnapping Christians in the north. And then neighboring Niger as well, Boko Haram and ISIS. Now you got the internet scams, which have become huge growth industry in Nigeria. And even the epidemic level growth of trafficking in humans and their body parts. I could spend weeks covering all that, but we'll see. Number 8 is also in Africa, Congo. I'd really like to do some reporting on the rise of illegal cobalt mining. I've seen some pretty interesting documentaries on that. Children as young as 7 are being worked nearly to death in what amounts to modern-day slavery as they dig away by hand for cobalt, which is an important mineral that's used for batteries in electric cars. So maybe those vehicles are earth-friendly, but they certainly don't seem to be very human-friendly, especially if you're a poor family in sub-Saharan Africa. Now, there are also stories to be told about the insidious growth of the Islamic fundamentalism that's crossing Africa. In fact, I might try to get an embed with U.S. troops that are doing some work there also. Number 9 is Nicaragua. I talked about this issue a few episodes ago, but that country has all the makings to be another Venezuela, and it's seen an explosion of violent protests and riots over the past year and a half. Plus, it's an easy trip for me from Panama, so I could do that story in just a couple days. And number 10 is Honduras. I'd like to do some investigative reporting into the source of the recent migrant caravans and kind of how the people feel left behind when their families leave and go to the U.S. I believe there are places in Honduras where people could move to if the poverty or violence was actually so bad in their own neighborhoods. And I'd like to show you those places. There are 9 million people in Honduras, and the most recent caravan out of there is over 15,000. I'd like to investigate the things that make people leave and find out if it really has more to do with the pull factors from the United States, like our welfare programs, or the push factors from their own country. Listen, every year I make plans like this about the places I'd like to go, but as you know, there are always unseen disasters and wars and terror attacks that come without notice, and I end up heading off with just a few hours to pack to cover those kinds of events. So who knows what will happen this year, but wherever I go, there are always people who need help. And I want to bring you their stories and give you the ability to reach directly into their lives and help them and see how your generosity changes their lives for the better. One of the worst things about watching the news is that you're usually so helpless to do anything about the tragedies the media is telling you about. And it's been proven that that is a very stressful thing to do. Well, I want to change that. So join me, won't you? It'll help a lot if you share and like and subscribe on YouTube or Podbean or iTunes or Facebook or wherever else you get the podcast. But in light of the rampant censorship and the attempts by the big social media companies to stifle conservative voices, I'm going to be moving more and more of my content over to patreon.com/hotzone. So please go there and check that out. And while you're there, subscribe for $3 a month and support what we're doing. Well, look, I'm glad you're here. Let's make 2019 the best year ever for a lot of hurting people. That's what we do here on the Hot Zone. So we'll see you tomorrow.
The Hot Zone is produced by Amy Holton and Livefire Media. Copyright 2019.